back with another Circle Food Tour powered by PNC Bank. This is David with the UCI team. I'm out of camera today. You're going to see pastry chef Kevin Shlappal with the coffee house demonstrating how to bake chocolate French macarons. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Kevin.
Sure, thanks. So today we're going to make really nice cookie, French macaroon, specifically a chocolate and coffee ganache macaroon. I feel over the years the macaroon has become kind of a very intimidating cookie for the home baker to make. I know I was definitely intimidated by it the first time I did it, and I've messed up plenty of trays of macaroons. But hopefully today I can show you a really solid recipe, some really useful techniques that will help you make a delicious and beautiful cookie at home.
Great, I'm excited to see it.
Great. So first thing with this recipe, it's important kind of to have everything you need ready to go prior to starting. Once we kind of start the process of making the batter for the cookie, you kind of got to keep those wheels moving. So I always like to have my sheet tray ready, as well as my other ingredients, any other utensils I'm going to use, spatulas, sifters, that sort of thing. Another nice little tip that I like to use is I put like a little stencil underneath. In the kits, they're going to find parchment paper. I have not drawn the circles on for everybody. Feel free to do that at home. The ones I use are about 2 inches in diameter. That makes a really nice, 2 to 3 bite kind of cookie. Feel free to make them smaller or larger, whatever you want to do. But yeah.
Now, Kevin, when I bake cookies, I always have to worry about them spreading. It looks like those circles are pretty consistent and even.
Right.
Do macarons spread when you bake them like a traditional cookie?
No, macarons actually are going to go upward instead of outward, as long as we, all those steps are in place. When we do pipe these, and when we get to that point I'll show you, we do pipe them just a bit smaller than the circle, about 1/4 of an inch to the edge on here. And that way, once they're piped, they are going to settle a little gently, but there's no real spread to them. Once in the oven, like I said, they're going to go upward, not outward.
Great, great.
Great. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is we'll combine our dry ingredients. So in here we have our almond flour, our cocoa powder, and our powdered sugar. I have this really nice sifting drum here. At home, if you have a fine mesh strainer, I feel most people do. It's what people drain pasta into and that sort of thing. That'll work just fine. So all we're doing is getting everything combined and kind of breaking up those lumps that you find in powdered sugar and even the almond flour.
Now, what happens if you skip this step?
You're going to end up with a real lumpy looking cookie.
Okay.
Yeah, this just helps keep that batter nice and smooth. It helps keep the cookie from being kind of dimply and when it's all done.
Makes sense, makes sense.
And you'll even see most almond flours, when you get them at the store, they're not ground as fine as I would like to see. So even in this drum, once we're done sifting, you're going to see there's some little chunky bits of almond flour, and that's totally fine. And whatever's left in the drum or in the sifter, that can just get discarded. All right, so we have everything combined in our bowl. We're just going to set that aside for now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the base for the cookie batter. And so with a stand mixer, if you have a stand mixer at home, it's a great thing to use with a whisk attachment. If not, if you have like a hand blender, that'll work just fine as well. So in this bowl right now, we just have our egg whites. And all we're going to do is on like a medium speed, we're going to bring those up. We just want them to get kind of foamy and frothy. So that happens fairly quick. We're nice and foamy right now. Again, something I didn't mention, have your egg whites at room temperature. That way, as they whip, we're just going to get the most volume out of them. So now that we have these whipped and frothy, we're going to begin to add our sugar. I like to do it, I'll turn the machine off. I do it at about 2 tablespoons or so at a time. And I can go right down in there. Mix it back up. And then we're going to start it at like a medium speed, and then we'll bring it back up to a real high speed and get everything really incorporated. And then what we're looking for, as we do this, we want to make a really nice, stiff, glossy French meringue. So we can go ahead and add that next addition, about 2 tablespoons. Then we'll add our last little bit. So now all that sugar is incorporated in there, and we're just going to let this go until we get a nice, stiff, shiny meringue.
Kevin, how long have you been baking for?
I've been doing it for just about 10 years now.
Do you have a favorite pastry you like to make?
A favorite pastry? Probably macaroons, actually, to be completely honest. Starting off, doing them, they are difficult. They are, it's something to master. So once you get it really good, it's kind of a good feeling.
Well, I'm glad that's what we picked then for this, for this kit.
They're really versatile too. You can fill them with any sort of flavor. You can flavor the shell anything you want. So. So at this point, I like to stop and kind of see where we're at, and I'll show you here. So our meringue, still pretty loose, not quite stiff enough. Also at this point, I like to give the bowl just a quick scrape. Any of that sugar that kind of went to the side, didn't really get incorporated, or anything that's sticking in the bottom, I just like to bring everything back together. Put that back on and get this to a nice stiff and shiny meringue.
Now, what are you looking for as that mixes?
Just a really nice, kind of double in volume. And like I said, it'll get very shiny, and it's going to get nice and stiff. You want a nice stiff meringue because as we as we put our dry ingredients in there, we're going to have to mix it. We're going to deflate it a little bit. So the stronger we can make it, the more kind of wiggle room we have to be a little aggressive with the batter to get, you know, all these ingredients in there. Stop it one more time just to kind of check. You can see we're getting a little stiffer. It's still a little droopy. At this point, I'd say we're about halfway there. And if I wanted to flavor my shells with anything, an extract or whatever, this is the point that I would add that. Or if I were going to color them, this is where I would add my food coloring. With these ones today, we're going to get that colored flavor from the cocoa powder.
For those familiar with the coffee house, you may not have known that the pastries here are all baked right in the facility. We're actually in the ground floor. The first floor and the second floor are obviously open now, and they've made plenty of great adaptations to make sure that you can socially distance inside and out. They are one of the few establishments in the circle with one of the largest patios, actually. So it's a great spot if you're looking for a coffee house, and if your local coffee house isn't quite open to full capacity yet, I'd highly recommend checking out the coffee house. They're nestled in an old historic home right on Case Western Reserve campus next to the Linslada Alumni House and across the street from Cleveland Institute of Music. Kevin, you bake the pastries here, obviously, as the pastry chef. How early do you have to come in to get this started in the morning?
I start my day typically about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And has that been typical in your tenure as a pastry chef?
Here and there. It depends on kind of where I've been. I mean, obviously more traditional sit-down restaurants, the schedule's a little different. Usually still starting earlier than most everybody else in the kitchen. Which is nice because it's nice to be alone and be able to spread out. But yeah, definitely those early hours come with the job description, so which I don't mind. I'm an early bird, so. We'll give it a peek one more time. Let's see where we're at. You can see now definitely holding more of a shape, but even still, we want it still a little firmer.
Do you have a favorite flavor of macarons?
I'm a big coconut fan, so anything coconut, coconut caramel.
For those that are, sourcing their own ingredients, obviously we're doing a double chocolate, so a chocolate filling and a chocolate cookie. If you wanted to replace the chocolate in this, you said you can obviously flavor it different ways. What are some go-to materials, or what would you typically buy for a
Sure.
coconut flavoring or pistachio flavoring?
Yeah, most macaroon fillings are either a ganache base or a buttercream base. You know, if you make your basic ganache or a basic buttercream, any sort of extract is going to work well in there. Yeah. So I think we're just about there. And yeah, we got a nice, it's holding a nice tall peak there. As I kind of push the whisk into the meringue, I can feel it kind of give me a little bit of resistance on the way down. That just shows it's nice and strong. Just gonna knock all that nice meringue back into the bowl. And from here, we're gonna begin to add our dry ingredients. It's best to do this by hand. Like I said, this is kind of a delicate cookie, it's a delicate batter. So you don't want to throw this back on and mix everything together. We just want to get everything nicely incorporated as quickly and as with, you know, as less fuss as possible. With a recipe this size, I typically like to do just about half of the dry ingredients. And we're just going to start to kind of fold everything together. Make sure you're getting down underneath, getting all those dry ingredients incorporated. Add our second addition here.
I almost said at the beginning, you can always use a hand whisk, but after watching that, I don't think I'd want to do that. You definitely need a mixer.
Yeah, if you got some really big muscles, yeah, go for it. But yeah, mixer's definitely gonna make things a little easier. I did when I first learned to make these, the person that I learned from, she would do everything by hand. I mean, she'd whisk the whites together, but we were making huge volumes of stuff. So, I mean, you really did you had like tennis elbow by the time you were done mixing everything. So at this point, we're pretty much everything incorporated. You can still see some kind of streaks of just the white meringue in here. I like to transfer it back to a slightly larger bowl. I'm going to use a real big bowl just for visual sake. But this just gives you a little more surface area to work with and a little more room to fold everything together. Just scrape everything out. So now we're just going to kind of continue to fold this. The technique that I like to use is I'll take the batter, kind of get it all in the center there, and then kind of do like a slicing motion just down the center. I'll bring that all over top and then kind of wrap everything back around again. So I'm not really stirring everything together, I'm just kind of folding it back on top of itself. And ultimately what we want is a nice smooth batter that has a little bit of flow to it. Whenever I'm showing somebody for the first time this part, I always tell them to envision, you know, lava slowly rolling down a hill, because that's ultimately what we want. If you don't mix it enough, you're going to end up with a cookie that, you know, has a lot of peaks and, you know, divots and stuff in it. It won't stay as smooth. And if we mix too much, they're going to spread and they're not going to get that nice lift in the oven. They'll come out kind of flat. So So just get everything back incorporated. I'll give it one stir and then I'll kind of fold everything back onto itself. Kind of take a minute and kind of watch how it falls. And you can see there's a little bit of movement to it. There's these ridges up on top here. You want those to kind of slowly dissipate into a smooth batter. I'll do it one more time just so we can see. So give it a couple folds. Bring everything back together. And then we can see it's got some nice flow to it. It's not completely just bottoming out and getting real flat. It's still kind of holding its shape. And at this point, I think we're there. So next, we're going to fill our pastry bag and we'll start piping these. In the kits, they will get pastry bags included. I'm using a tip, a pastry tip, just kind of a medium open tip. If you have that at home, feel free to use it. If not, you can snip the end of the bag and it'll work just the same. If you are using a tip, a little trick I like to show everyone is just to help with filling. If you take the bag, give it a little twist and push it in. That way, as you fill, you're not going to worry about everything flowing out the bottom. And I feel like with piping it, this is kind of the area that causes everyone a little bit of stress. And I'll show you kind of how I've done it to keep nice uniform cookies. Get everything worked down there. And if you've twisted your bag, now you can just kind of pop it out. That way we haven't lost anything. So the key for piping these is going to be, you don't want to move your hand or the bag up and down as you're going. You want to keep it nice and steady. Apply just some nice even pressure. And then before we move on to the next cookie, you want to kind of pull away. You don't want to pull up. If you pull up, you're going to end up with more of a Hershey Kiss kind of looking cookie. As we pull away, that's going to keep us a nice flat top on it. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. So we're keeping it just nice and level, even pressure. And we're going to pipe it just to about 1/4 of an inch of those circles. And then we'll do a little twist and a pull. Do that again. Twist and pull. Twist and pull. So nice pressure. I'm releasing and then pull away.
So that pull ensures that it stays smooth on top?
Yeah, it keeps you from having a peak. And I'll show if you were to just pull up, see, then you end up with this little divot, which if you get, you can knock down. But that pull away is kind of key. Obviously, I'm using a larger sheet tray just because I have a larger oven here at home. 2 half sheet trays would work just fine, or your standard home sheet tray. Just get that last one there, pull away. So now that everything's piped, the last thing I like to do before we set these aside, I just give them a nice kind of firm tap on the table, and that's going to help any air bubbles that may be caught inside. It'll help them kind of come to the surface. If you don't do that, you kind of run the risk of, they're like little time bombs in there. So in the oven, once they go into the oven, they can explode and then you'll end up, with a blown out top. So just a nice little tap. I'll spin it, another tap, and then just drop it. At this point, before we bake them, they need to dry. Drying them ensures that when people talk about macaroons, they always mention the foot of the macaroon, and that's kind of like that little frilly bottom part. Drying them gets you that really nice foot. It keeps them from, when they bake, expanding and going outward, and with that dry top, they're going to go upward. All the steam and everything else kind of goes out the side and the bottom, and that's what helps create that foot. For most people, I mean, if you have air conditioning at home, if your house is a pretty even temperature, the drying process should take maybe 15 to 20 minutes at the most. A room that's a little warmer or a little more humid, it's going to take a little longer. I have in the past, if my house was too warm, I've put them in front of like a real low, gentle fan, and that kind of just helps speed it up. I've heard people use a hair dryer. I've never tried it, but if you want to try it at home, feel free. Let me know how that works out. But yeah, at this point, we're going to set these aside and let them dry out for a minute. And
so when you're letting them dry, does the texture change? Is there a visual element?
There is, and I'll show you what we're looking for ultimately when they're done. Ideally, with a clean and dry finger, you will be able to touch the top and you won't bring back any batter on your finger. You'll have a nice clean finger still.
Gotcha. So you started microwaving your chips, chocolate chips?
Yeah, so the chocolate, before I make a ganache, I just kind of like to give it a little head start. And I'm not looking for it to be completely melted, but it just helps everything kind of incorporate a little quicker. So now we're gonna make the filling for the macaroons. And in this pot we have the heavy cream, the corn syrup, and the ground coffee. The corn syrup is just in there to help with the texture of the ganache. It kind of makes everything a little smoother once it's done. Kind of keeps the chocolate from crystallizing and becoming very, very firm and hard. So what we're gonna do is just put this over like a medium to low heat and just bring it up to just to a simmer. And then we'll set it aside and let that coffee kind of infuse into that cream.
Any special tricks if you're using a gas range instead of electric?
No, just make sure it's a nice low heat. You don't want to bring this up to a big rolling boil, just keep it low, let it take its time. So now you can see we're just getting to a simmer. We're getting those little bubbles right around the edges. So at this point, we're just going to cut it off, and we'll remove it from the heat, and just let that ground coffee, just kind of infuse into the cream there. Typically, about 5 minutes or so is plenty of time for it to infuse in there. Okay. So we've let that now infuse in there. All I'm going to do is return it back to the heat. Because it's cooled slightly, and just get it back up to that simmer. And now we're going to take that, we're going to pour it right over our chocolate. Again, ideally, you want to do it over some sort of mesh strainer just to get out, most of those coffee grounds. So now we have that in there, and just slowly start to bring everything together. Make sure you're really scraping the bottom so you don't have any bits of unmelted chocolate there. So now you can see everything's nicely incorporated. Just scrape down our sides, bring everything back together. And then we're just going to want that to sit just until it sets up just into like a nice pipeable consistency. At room temp, that's probably going to take 20, 30 minutes or so. But it's just enough time for your macarons to continue drying and getting those in the oven baked and cooled. Also at this point too, I like to put a little piece of plastic wrap on top of the ganache. This just helps from a skin forming on the top of the ganache, which is, we don't want that to happen here. We want that to happen on the macaroons. just press that right down onto the top of the ganache. And again, we're just going to let that sit until it's cooled a little bit and set enough that we can pipe it. So we've given these time to create that skin on top of them. And you'll see with just a clean finger, if we touch those, there's no batter coming back. And you'll feel there's a little bit of tension on the surface of the macaroons there. And at this point, they're good to go in the oven. So temperature-wise, you want your oven at about 275. It's pretty low. And I know when I make them at home in just my typical home oven, it's usually about 18 to 20 minutes. When I do them here at work, we have a convection oven, so things move a little quicker. And they're about 16 minutes or so. Obviously, oven temperatures and times are going to vary. But yeah, typically the rule of thumb is about 18 to 20 minutes in your typical home oven. So now these have fully baked. They've been in the oven for about 16 minutes. When I do bake them, I'll do, and I believe it's on the recipe, but 10 minutes, and then I give everything a rotate, just so I get just even, cooking all over the tray. You will find sometimes that your macaroons will stick to your parchment. If that happens, I like to take, just a little offset spatula and kind of run it underneath and just pull those off. Usually they come off pretty clean. You can kind of just pull them, but if you feel them sticking a little bit, that's a good way just to get it off nice and clean.
Sometimes, Kevin, when I see a baking recipe, there's different cooking times for a silver tray or a nonstick tray versus like a darker
The darker trays, sure.
What causes that? Do you know?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
I've always used like silver trays when it comes to even cake pans and that sort of thing. I would assume it's just that they hold heat a little differently because of the darker color. Yeah, that's something actually I don't know. So at this point, everything's baked and cooled, and we want to fill them now. So now that we've kind of released them from the tray, we'll just go through and we'll match them up. Just kind of find like sizes, so they're nice and even, and I'll line them all up just on the tray here.
How long do you suggest you wait after you pull them out of the oven?
Cooling. Make sure they're cool. I would say 15, 20 minutes.
At a minimum?
At a minimum, yeah. You really want to be sure that they're nice and cool. If they're still warm inside, when you go to take them off, they will tend to, you'll kind of lose the bottom. They'll stick to your tray a little more. So we're just going through, finding matches.
I never thought about the matching process. Now I understand why you have those circles as a nice little guy.
Yeah, that helps just kind of keep everything consistent. Kind of makes this process go a little quicker. So now we have everything matched up, and we'll go ahead, we'll fill our pastry bag with our ganache. And if you're doing this at home with a pastry tip, again, I would suggest using pretty much the same one that you would have used for piping the macaroons. And again, with that little trick of twisting it and pushing it in to keep your filling. If you're not using a tip, fill it first before you snip. Because if you snip, there's no real way to kind of close it off. This way you're ensuring you're not spilling it everywhere. And you can see this is set long enough now that it's still a little loose, but it is holding its shape for sure. So we'll go ahead and fill this. kind of work everything down, try to get any air bubbles out that are in there. And then we will cut our tip. And then really there's several different ways that you can go about filling these. It's easy enough just to pipe, just like you would the macaroon shell itself, just pipe a little dollop on top. You can do a little swirly. And I'd say you're probably adding about, I don't know, 1.5 tablespoon of filling to each one. You want to have a nice ratio of filling to cookie. On there. And then we'll go ahead and start making our little sandwiches. So what I always tell people is it's less of a push down, it's kind of more of a like wiggle everything into place. So you get that nice kind of presentation of the filling in the center there. Just go through and do all of these the same way. And that's it. These, I mean, they're great right now as is, just baked. Typically when most places make macaroon, there is a little bit of an aging process, or so we call it. If you make them, I ideally like them the next day. Your fillings kind of allow the shell to soften a little bit. So it's not such of a crunch bite. It's a little bit of a, you'll still get a nice little crunch from the shell of the crust, or the cookie, and then the interior will be nice and soft from kind of absorbing some of that moisture from the filling itself. But like I said, they're delicious.
Now, if you are waiting the next day, how would you store them? How would you recommend? In
the refrigerator,
okay.
Nicely covered and sealed. They do tend to like to absorb moisture if they're left open in the refrigerator. So you will, if you don't cover them, you'll see that the shells will get a little more soggy than you would like. But yeah, definitely in the fridge and just nicely covered, whether in a Tupperware or just wrapped somehow. So like I explained before we had baked these with the drying process and that foot that you're creating, if you look, this little bit of that frilly edge, that's what we call the foot of the macaroon. You know, you'll see some that have a really predominant foot. These are pretty good. I'd say they could be a little better in my opinion, but they're still nice. But that little frilly edge, that's what they call the foot of the macaroon.
That looks great. Obviously plated with some nice coffee beans, which if you purchase one of the kits, you got a nice 1 pound bag of coffee. Pastry Chef Kevin, thank you. This has been a wonderful time.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Please, I hope you continue to make them. Like I said, you know, they may not be perfect the first time. Mine definitely weren't perfect the first time. It's a lot of repetition and practice. But I can assure you, if they don't look as beautiful as you would like, they're still going to taste as good as anything else. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in for another Circle Food Tour powered by PNC Bank. We'll be back with our last stop at Provenance at CMA. Chef Doug Katz will be making a Peruvian chicken with rice and Mexican brownies. Be sure to go to universitycircle.org/circleconnects to purchase that kit now. You can also look back at all of the previous meals we've prepared with local chefs, as well as download recipes and educational kits that accompany each demonstration. Thanks again, and thanks to PNC for bringing us food, fitness, and fun all summer long. And for more information, visit universitycircle.org/circleconnects.